Isla found out her sister-in-law had faked a relapse 40 minutes before the toasts started. Not from Odette, from a bridesmaid who'd had one glass of champagne too many and thought she was being helpful. "I just think it's so brave of her," the bridesmaid said, touching Isla's arm like she was delivering comfort instead of a grenade. "Coming back from something like that and still showing up today." Isla smiled the way brides are trained to smile at strangers' relatives. Coming back from what? The bridesmaid's face did something complicated. "The relapse. 2 days ago. Callum told everyone at the rehearsal dinner she almost didn't come." Isla had been standing 4 feet away at the rehearsal dinner. She remembered the room going quiet. She remembered Callum's mother crying into a napkin. She remembered thinking, with the particular guilt of a bride who feels selfish for thinking anything at all, "At least Odette is here now. At least she's trying." What she had not remembered, because it had not happened, was Odette drinking. Ever. In 4 years of knowing her future sister-in-law, Isla had never once seen Odette so much as order a beer. She'd assumed, everyone had assumed, that this was simply who Odette was. Careful, private about it. The family didn't ask questions, because the family had learned a long time ago that asking Odette questions cost more than it returned. So when Odette stood up at the rehearsal dinner, pale and shaking, and said she'd relapsed on Sunday and almost hadn't found the strength to come, the room had done what rooms do for a woman in visible pain. It had absorbed her. It had rearranged itself around her. The toast that night became, quietly, about Odette's courage instead of about Isla and Callum's marriage. And nobody noticed the redirection happening because nobody wants to be the person who points out redirection at a rehearsal dinner. Isla had let it happen. She'd told herself it was one night. She'd told herself Odette needed it more than she did. She had even, God help her, felt a small, private flicker of shame for resenting how much of the evening it had swallowed. Because what kind of person resents a woman's recovery on the eve of her own wedding? Now, in a church hallway, in a dress she'd paid for herself in 11 monthly installments, she was being told, kindly, uselessly, how brave her sister-in-law was for showing up sober to a wedding she had never once shown any sign of not being sober for. "When did she tell people this?" Isla asked. "Last night, in the group chat." The bridesmaid pulled out her phone before Isla could stop her, scrolling with the easy confidence of someone who didn't understand what she was about to detonate. Here, she said she wasn't going to be able to do the toast because of it, which, honestly, totally understandable. Isla read the message twice. "I don't think I can get up there and pretend everything's fine when I almost didn't make it through the weekend. I hope Isla understands. This day should still be about her and Callum. I just need to protect my own healing right now." 11 likes, 6 hearts, 3 replies telling Odette she was so strong for being honest. One reply, from an aunt Isla barely knew, said simply, "Sending you so much love today. Thinking of you more than the happy couple, honestly, LOL." Isla read that one 3 times. Isla had asked Odette to give a toast 4 months ago. She had asked because Callum wanted it, because he thought it would heal something between his sister and his new wife, some old competitive silence neither of them ever named out loud. Odette had said yes immediately, too immediately, in a way Isla hadn't examined at the time because there was no reason yet to examine it. She remembered Odette hugging her that day, saying she couldn't wait, that it would mean so much to say something real in front of everyone. There was a reason to examine it now. Because a toast that Odette hadn't wanted to give had just become a relapse Odette hadn't had, delivered to a group chat of 40 people the night before Isla's wedding, timed exactly so that nobody could question it without looking cruel. Isla thought about the timing specifically. Not the week before, not the week after, the night before, when nobody would have the composure to fact-check a crisis, when everyone's attention was already stretched as thin as it could go. Isla stood very still in the hallway, holding a bouquet she'd hand-tied herself at 6 that morning, and understood, clearly, coldly for the first time, that she was not watching her sister-in-law struggle. She was watching her perform. And she had exactly 40 minutes to decide what she was going to do about it before she walked down an aisle toward a family that already believed the wrong version of today. She thought, absurdly, of the seating chart. Odette was at the front, third row, on the aisle, where everyone would see her face during the vows. She had asked for that seat herself 2 weeks ago, saying it would help her feel connected to the day even if she couldn't be up there giving the toast. The thing about Odette, the thing Isla was only now allowing herself to fully see, was that she had never once lost anything by being fragile. Every fragile moment had, on reflection, purchased her something: attention, forgiveness, a front row seat. The specific, undivided focus of a room that would otherwise have been looking at someone else. It started small, the way these things always start small enough to excuse. Odette missing family dinners because she was having a hard week, with no follow-up on what the week had actually been hard about. Odette leaving the bridal shower early, citing anxiety, only for Isla to see her posted at a rooftop bar 2 hours later, radiant, tagged by 3 friends, captioned, "Girls' night, we needed this." Odette's opinions arriving not as opinions, but as fragile confessions. "I just feel like nobody ever really checks on me." Delivered at moments precisely engineered to make checking on her the only acceptable response in the room. Callum had never seen it. Or he had seen it, and built a life around not seeing it. The way you learn to walk around a piece of furniture in the dark without ever admitting the furniture is badly placed. "She's been through a lot," he told Isla once, early in their relationship, when Isla had gently asked why every family gathering seemed to reroute itself around his sister's moods. "You don't know the whole history." Isla hadn't pushed. She was the outsider then, 3 months into dating Callum, in no position to diagnose a family she'd just joined. But 3 years later, engaged, halfway into wedding planning, she'd started keeping a private tally she never spoke aloud. Every canceled plan, every dramatic exit, every time the temperature of a room changed the instant Odette needed it to. She remembered, specifically, the Christmas 2 years ago, when Callum's parents announced they were finally selling the family lake house, a piece of news that had taken the whole dinner table's attention for exactly 6 minutes before Odette excused herself from the room, visibly upset, and returned 20 minutes later to say she was fine, she just needed a second, and please, everyone, don't worry about her. The lake house was never discussed again that night. Isla had thought nothing of it at the time. She thought of it very differently now. It always changed. That was the part Isla hadn't let herself say out loud until this exact moment, standing in a hallway in her wedding dress. Odette's crises did not simply happen to her. They arrived on schedule, in proportion to whatever Odette stood to lose that day. She'd have to think about the toasts that never happened. She'd have to think about the 11 likes, the aunt's comment, the front row seat. But first, she had a wedding to walk into, and a decision buried underneath the panic that was starting, quietly, to clarify itself. She was not going to let today become a story about Odette's healing. If you've ever watched someone you love build their whole family life around not seeing something painfully obvious, you already know how heavy that hallway felt. This is exactly the kind of pattern we spend real time untangling here. So if that's you, go ahead and subscribe, because we're not done seeing this one clearly. The bridesmaid was still talking, something now about how the whole family was rallying around Odette, how sweet it was, how this was probably the healthiest she'd looked in months. Isla wasn't listening anymore. She was watching, through the small window in the hallway door, her mother-in-law dabbing her eyes at a pew, crying. Isla now understood, for a relapse that had never occurred, for a daughter who had never actually been in danger, for a story that existed only in a group chat and a set of very convincing tears. "I need 5 minutes alone," Isla said, and walked toward the room where Odette was sitting. She could hear her own pulse in her ears the whole way down the hall. Not from nerves about the wedding, from something colder and more specific. The particular clarity that comes right before you say a true thing to someone who has spent years making sure nobody ever does. Odette was in the bridal suite when Isla walked in, sitting very correctly on the edge of a velvet chair, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she hadn't needed yet. The room smelled like the lilies from the centerpieces, too sweet, slightly overwhelming, the kind of smell Isla knew she would now associate with this exact conversation for the rest of her life. She looked up, and for exactly 1 second before the performance recalibrated, Isla saw something flicker across her face that wasn't grief. It was calculation. "Isla," Odette stood, arms already opening for the hug that would end the conversation before it started. "I'm so sorry about the toast. I really wanted to be there for you both. You didn't relapse." The room went silent in a way rooms do when someone says the true thing out loud for the first time. Even the lilies seemed to hold still. Odette's arms lowered slowly. "Excuse me?" "I've never seen you drink. Not once. Not at Thanksgiving, not at your own birthday, not at the bachelorette when everyone else was 3 drinks in and you had sparkling water and told the bartender you don't really do that anymore. I remember thinking it was nice, mature. I didn't think it was a lie you were setting up for later." Isla's voice stayed level, which cost her more than shouting would have. "You told 40 people you relapsed. You told your mother. She's out there right now believing you almost didn't survive this weekend." "You don't know what I'm going through," Odette said, and her voice cracked exactly on cue, exactly the way it always cracked. "This is such a hard day for me, watching my brother—" "Watching your brother what, Odette? Get married?" The crack disappeared instantly. That was the tell, the one Isla would replay for months afterward. How fast the tremor left Odette's voice the moment sympathy stopped landing. It was like watching someone set down a prop they no longer needed. "You're really doing this today," Odette said flatly. "I'm not doing anything. I'm asking you a question you don't want to answer honestly, because the honest answer is that you didn't want to give a toast for a marriage you've spent 4 months quietly undermining, so you invented a crisis dramatic enough that nobody would ever question skipping it. And it worked. It worked so well that your mother drove herself into a state of grief over something that never happened, on the one day that wasn't supposed to be about you." Somewhere down the hall, the organ started playing the processional cue, 3 minutes early, the way it always does when a wedding coordinator is trying to hurry a bride along without knowing why she's late. Odette's face did something Isla had genuinely never seen it do before. It went still. Not sad still. Calculating still. The mask temporarily dropped because there was no more room to keep performing and negotiate at the same time. "If you say anything to my mother," Odette said quietly, "you will be the villain who accused a woman in recovery of lying on your own wedding day. Think about how that sounds. Think about what everyone will say about you." And there it was. Not a confession, not even close, but confirmation. A threat wrapped in concern, delivered with the exact cadence Odette used every single time she needed a room's sympathy to stay pointed at her. Isla noticed, distantly, that Odette had not once said the words, "That's not true." She had only ever talked about consequences, never denial. Here's the part I keep coming back to. Has anyone in your life ever threatened you with how something would look instead of denying whether it was true? Because that's usually the tell. Drop it in the comments. I want to know if you caught it as fast as Isla did." The coordinator knocked on the door. "Isla, we need you in position." Isla looked at her sister-in-law one last time before the music started and said the only thing she had left. "I'm not going to say anything to your mother today," Isla said. "Today isn't about you, whether you meant it to be or not. But this conversation isn't over." She turned and walked out before Odette could answer, because there was nothing Odette could say that wouldn't be another performance, and Isla had exactly one aisle left to walk down before she became someone's wife. And she was not going to let her sister-in-law's fiction cost her that too. The ceremony itself, afterward, she would remember only in fragments. Callum's face when she appeared at the end of the aisle, undone in the specific way grooms get undone when the person they love becomes suddenly, physically real to them. Her father's hand trembling slightly as he passed her off. The vows, which she'd rewritten 4 times and still stumbled through anyway, laughing halfway through at her own nerves while the whole room laughed with her. What she would remember with total clarity was Odette, 3 rows back in her requested aisle seat, dabbing at eyes that had produced no actual tears, receiving a steady stream of hand squeezes from relatives who thought they were comforting a woman in crisis. At one point, during the exchange of rings, Isla watched her own new mother-in-law reach over and squeeze Odette's hand, and Odette, in response, gave the smallest, bravest little nod, the kind that says, "I'm okay, don't worry about me," in a way engineered to make everyone worry about her more. The reception was worse. Because it was there, champagne in hand, toast cards distributed, DJ checking his levels, that Isla's new mother-in-law pulled her aside during the cake cutting and said, voice thick with real emotion, "I'm just so proud of Odette for pushing through today. I know it wasn't easy for her." And Isla, holding a knife over a cake she'd spent $400 on, had to decide in real time whether to let that sentence stand. She let it stand. Not because she believed it, because she had learned, in the space of one afternoon, exactly how expensive the truth was going to be to say out loud, and she wasn't ready to spend that currency at her own reception. She smiled, said something non-committal about how glad she was Odette could be there, and cut the cake while her hands, out of frame of every photo being taken, would not fully stop shaking. There was a moment, later, during the father-daughter dance, when Isla caught Odette's eye across the room. Odette raised her glass of sparkling water in a small, private toast, as if to say, "Well played, but I'm still standing." Isla looked away first. But something had shifted. Isla could feel it the way you feel weather changing before the sky confirms it, a pressure drop, a stillness before something breaks. She was no longer the daughter-in-law who didn't ask questions. She had asked one, directly, to Odette's face, and Odette had answered with a threat instead of a denial. That gap between what Odette said and what Odette didn't say was where the whole thing had cracked open. Later that night, packing up gifts in the hotel room, still in the slip she'd worn under her dress, Callum finally asked why she'd been so quiet during the toasts. She told him. All of it. The group chat message, the 11 likes, the aunt's comment about thinking of Odette more than the happy couple, the bridal suite conversation, word for word, including the line about being made the villain. Callum sat down slowly on the edge of the hotel bed, still in his suit pants and undershirt, and went very quiet in a way Isla had never seen from him before. "She's done this before," he said finally. "Not exactly like this, but there was a version of this at my college graduation. She had a panic attack during my speech, and my parents left the ceremony to sit with her in the car. I never got to see them clap. And at Dad's retirement party, she announced a breakup 2 hours before the toasts, and the whole night became about comforting her." It was the first time in 4 years Isla had heard him say it plainly, instead of explaining it away. And she understood, watching his face rearrange itself around a decade of evidence he'd never let himself add up, that the real story wasn't going to end with her wedding day. It was going to end with whatever happened the next time Odette needed a room's sympathy, and what would happen when, this time, someone was finally watching closely enough to say so. It took 3 weeks for the second crisis to arrive. Odette called their mother in the middle of the night, claiming she'd been in a minor car accident, shaken but fine, and that she just needed someone to talk to. Their mother, still glowing from the wedding, still telling everyone at church how beautiful the ceremony had been, drove 40 minutes at 2 a.m. to sit with her daughter. There was no accident report, no damage to the car, no dented bumper, no scratched paint. Nothing Isla's mother-in-law thought to look for, because she wasn't looking for evidence, she was looking after her daughter. When Callum asked, gently, a few days later, what had happened exactly, Odette said she hadn't wanted to make a big deal of it, that she'd handled it herself, that she just needed her mum that night. When he asked which road it had happened on, she said she didn't want to relive it. When he asked if she'd called the police, she said it hadn't felt necessary since no one was hurt. Isla, hearing this secondhand from Callum, felt something settle into place with the quiet finality of a puzzle piece that had been forced into the wrong slot for years, finally clicking into the right one. "It's the same shape," she told Callum, sitting across from him at their kitchen table 3 weeks into married life, still learning the rhythm of a house that was now legally, officially theirs. Every time. A crisis nobody can verify, timed to whatever's happening that week that requires someone to drop everything and give her their full attention. The relapse story landed the same week as our wedding. The accident story landed 3 weeks after, right when your mum finally started talking about how proud she was of us, not her. Right when the wedding photos started coming back and everyone was posting them. Callum didn't argue. That, more than anything, told Isla how far the ground had already shifted under him. "I think," he said slowly, turning his coffee mug in a small circle on the table, "she's been doing this since we were kids, and I just never had a reason to add it up until you did it for me. I keep thinking about how many times I gave up something, a moment, an achievement, because hers felt more urgent. I never once asked whether it actually was." If you've ever watched a whole family quietly rearrange itself around one person's manufactured emergencies, you already know how disorienting it is when someone finally says the pattern out loud. Comment below if you've caught someone in your own life doing this. I read every one of them. Isla didn't confront Odette again. She didn't need to. Instead, she did something quieter and far more effective. She stopped absorbing the redirection. When Odette mentioned at the next family dinner how hard the last month had been, how nobody really understood what she'd been through, Isla simply said, "That sounds really hard," and changed the subject back to the actual occasion, Callum's mother's birthday. Without offering the follow-up questions Odette's stories were built to extract. Odette tried harder the next time. A vague reference to a doctor's appointment she didn't want to talk about. An offhand comment about how stressful things had been lately, delivered with a meaningful pause that used to invite 3 people to ask what was wrong. Nobody asked. Isla watched her notice nobody asking, watched the smallest flicker of recalibration cross her face, the same flicker Isla had seen in the bridal suite. Each attempt came slightly more dramatic than the last, each one met with the same calm, unhelpful warmth that gave her nothing to perform against. At one dinner, Odette excused herself abruptly from the table, the old move, the one that used to send someone chasing after her within 30 seconds. This time, nobody moved. Isla kept eating. Callum kept talking to his father about the game. Odette returned 12 minutes later, visibly surprised no one had come looking, and sat back down without a word. By the 4th attempt, something remarkable happened. Odette's mother, slowly, painfully, the way people do when a belief they've held for decades starts costing them more than it protects, began asking her own questions. Quiet ones at first, almost apologetic. Why didn't you call the police after the accident? Why did the relapse story change when I asked which meeting you'd gone to? Why do your crises always seem to happen the week someone else in this family has something good going on? Odette had answers for all of it, smooth and practiced. But Isla noticed her mother-in-law no longer looked fully satisfied by them. She noticed her holding a small, new silence after each explanation, the kind of silence that used to be filled instantly with reassurance and now simply sat there, unfilled. Odette had built an entire identity on being the family's fragile center. She had never once accounted for the possibility that the people around her might simply stop reacting, and that the silence that followed would be louder than any confrontation Isla could have staged in that bridal suite. 6 months after the wedding, Odette stopped calling with crises altogether. Not because she'd been caught exactly. Nobody ever produced a smoking gun. No dramatic reveal, no group confrontation around a dinner table where everyone finally said their piece at once. She simply ran out of an audience willing to perform the roles her stories required. The relapse she'd never had, the accident that left no damage, the panic attacks that resolved, the instant attention shifted elsewhere. Each one had needed someone on the other end supplying alarm, comfort, guilt. When the family, one by one, quietly stopped supplying it, the crises stopped arriving, the way a fire stops when nobody keeps feeding it wood. Isla thought about that a lot in the months after. How the whole architecture of Odette's control had never actually required lying convincingly. It had only ever required an audience that loved her enough not to ask the second question. The lie itself was almost secondary. The real engineering was in knowing exactly which people would never push back and exactly when to deploy the story so pushing back would look monstrous. She and Callum still see Odette at holidays. Politely. Carefully. Callum has started noticing things he says he can't unsee now. The tells, the timing, the tears that dry the instant sympathy stops arriving. The way Odette's eyes flick to the room's reaction before her voice ever cracks. He doesn't confront his sister often, but he watches now. That, Isla has learned, is sometimes the only shift a family can survive making at once. Not exile, not a full reckoning around a table with everyone weeping and apologizing. Just enough clear sight that the old performance stops working the way it used to. Their mother-in-law never fully admits what happened at the wedding. She still, occasionally, references how brave Odette was that day. But she says it differently now, more carefully, watching Isla's face when she says it. And Isla has come to understand that this careful watching is its own quiet acknowledgement, one that will never be spoken, but is somehow still real. If there's one thing Isla wishes she'd understood 4 years earlier, it's this. The people who cost you the most rarely announce themselves as villains. They announce themselves as fragile, and they let your own decency do the rest of the work for them. They don't need you to be foolish. They only need you to be kind and unwilling to be the person who asks the second question in a room full of people already comforting the first answer. You were never wrong for believing someone the first time they said they were struggling. You are not obligated to keep believing them the 5th time the story doesn't add up. You are not too much for asking questions, for noticing timing, for remembering what someone said last time and comparing it to what they're saying now. They were just not enough to survive being asked one honest question in a quiet room by someone who finally stopped looking away. And if a story like this one has ever played out in your own family, if you've ever watched a room rearrange itself around someone who needed it to, I'd love for you to tell me about it. Because next time, We're going deeper into what happens when the whole family finally starts asking the second question at once. That one is a lot. Around here, we don't just survive it, we understand it, and then we let it go.